Yeah, it's wonderful to be here, really among friends. We've gone way back with so many people and so many different conferences and collaborations. It's always this is in itself a nexus of collective intelligence. So um, Simon already mentioned in the beginning that I was one of the other CIs. So we've had collective intelligence. Dirk just told about his fascinating work on civic intelligence, and I kind of represent the community informatics community here. And what's interesting about community informatics as a field is that, of course, communities and informatics being a very deep topic of the focus of interest. And what you often see, for example, in building communities, as people call it, or community spaces or community-aware development, it's very inward looking. So it's looking at how can we make a community work better, perform better, build more trust, etc. What's interesting about the field of community informatics is not just academics, but there's also practitioners, and both of them looking at how can we reach out. So seeing society as a network of communities, seeing the outer context of communities, and seeing communities as emancipatory forms of collective intelligence, if you will, that really want to do something towards the common good. And that was also mentioned by several people already. And it's exactly that outward-looking focus that I want to work with today. So title of my presentation is From Classroom to Global Stage. And it's really to turn things around a bit to say, could we find a way to harness, and this is on purpose a bit of a ambiguous title, so Deliberation on Wicked Problems in Education. So it could be wicked problems that abound in education itself, but it's actually much more, the focus is on the harnessing. So assuming that students and their professors and everybody else in academics, for example, in academia, is doing a lot of talking about wicked problems, environmental crisis, etc. Could we do something with it to not let that stay in academia, but use that enormous power for the common good? That's really the challenge I'm trying to explore with you today. Won't go into too much detail here. Doug, for example, has already talked about it, and Simon as well. So this growing public crisis, and we really need to rapidly scale up our collective intelligence capacity in a fractal way, from very small community all the way up to planetary level. And of course, as we can see, and many examples have already been talked about today, there's plenty of collective intelligence tools out there. Great work, and we're far from done, but it's not enough. I would argue that a crucial bottleneck is the social capacity for collective intelligence. How can we put these tools to effective use at increasing levels of scale from the bottom up, basically? That's a key question. And I would like to look at education as a kind of a workforce for that. And just looking at university education, UNESCO has a recent numbers, 254 million students worldwide. That's a huge capacity of young, knowledgeable, energetic people who would want to do often a lot for the common good. So they're there. At the same time, of course, the academic learning goals are the typical ones, the subject-specific competencies. People need to learn to think critically and develop their problem-solving abilities. And the way we typically do this, and I used to be in academia myself, so I know how it works, is that you need lots of hands-on research projects, case studies were already mentioned. I think that's, for example, what Mark said, case study approach is learning by doing, very important aspects. However, as we know, with the incredible churn rate in academia, there's so much work, there's so many students, so many generations of students, and there's so little time. So often a lot of these projects are kind of artificial, rehashed, isolated, that just need to be done. Is there a way, is the overarching question, to break out of that mold and see if we can use that capacity that's there in a different way? So how can we bridge the worlds the gap between the worlds of collective action, the civic intelligence, the common good that, for example, Doug was talking about, and what's happening in education, and making sure that both students benefit, teaching, learning benefits, and that this need for collective action benefits. So this is kind of a vision. So it's just a thought experiment today, but I think it might fit in with some of the threads that we've been talking about. So what if we could see students as public investigators, going out there, working on real societal challenges? And Doug, I'm happy you mentioned Cyril, because I think that's still an outstanding example of how students do go out there in the real world, investigate things, apply their collective intelligence, help communities to come to solutions, next generations of students building on previous generation students' work. So to me, that's kind of an archetype of what I'm talking about here in terms of these public investigators. Deliberation I see as a key, and let me just get my slide here. This is actually what I want to show. Can we make these students work with real-world stakeholders, with deliberation as common ground? And deliberation being the careful discussion before you make decisions, the assessment of different arguments, pro and con, informed decision-making, as it were, which is important both for students to learn as a skill, and of course for the outside world. We need so many decisions on so many topics to be made. And also, and that's what I in my comment I made to Rupert, how can we go to socio-technical deliberation infrastructures that don't kill that spark? That's why I really love what you were saying, but harness that life force of enthusiastic, energetic, idealistic, if you will, collaboration. So now that all sounds grand, but how can we make it work? And I propose to repurpose a framework that we developed last year based on great work done by PhD students of Anna, Lucas, Anastasio, and of course Anna herself, and also Barbara Brachet. We put things together in evaluating tools, deliberation tools, to go from being individually usable to community useful. Meaning, of course, you have usability issues, typically in deliberation, ease of use, interaction, functionality, etc. But what you're really after, the next level, is discussion quality, summarizing things, explaining things, doing assessments of facts. Next level is the debate quality. So can we kind of create a synopsis of the main arguments? Where are we heading with this whole thing? What is the key issue? Where is the most controversy? But ultimately, and that's this final layer, that's when you really start reaching out in the real world. How can we work towards collective impact for common good, for public interest purposes, for social justice, citizen engagement? So this framework, keep that in mind. What actually I propose, that we not just use it for evaluation, but also use it for design, and not just for community useful, not just get stuck at that community level, but beyond that. So that collective intelligence infrastructure level at the higher levels, the city level, the country level, the planetary level, if you will. And this is just an example of a pattern. This also relates back to Doug's work on pattern languages. Let's say regreening the city would be a hypothetical case. And it's the same layers here in different order, but it's the same layers. So for example, usability, you could have as a dimension ease of use. And what I mean by socio-technical intervention, it looks like a tool, but it's much more. It's embedding this in a city, getting the right people involved to use it, to build on it, to feed it with data. So it's much more than just the technology. You could have a role-based dashboard, for example. That would mean that different stakeholders could play different roles. You could have urban planners' roles. You could have environmental scientists. You could have community liaisons. And of course, students playing many of these roles, but also discussing, etc., with outside stakeholders, prompting them, feeding them with information, writing reports, etc. Another example would be...
Aldo, 10 minutes.
Yeah. Okay, can I have one more minute? Debate quality,
yeah.
You could have a synopsis of where are we in the debate at that level. Another one, the next step is that given on the left-hand side, you see the same interventions, but now you see what impacts they have. So for example, that same role-based dashboard could help students develop skills like project management, stakeholder communication. From the collective action side, it would help them to collaborate among different stakeholders to get really things done in terms of agenda setting for regreening the city. The synopsis, students would learn how to think holistically, how to do systems analysis, and the city stakeholders could get a much better shared understanding of complex regreening challenges. This is just a pattern. The idea is that this helps you to organize this huge mess and get really solid deliberation grounded both in academia and in the real world out there. This is my final slide. So my point is trying to harness this deliberation capacity that's there in education to help address wicked problems, nurture these complex collaborative problem solving skills. And I think it was mentioned in one of the slides, maybe by Mike, in a troubled world, but also a world that's connected. So there's also opportunities to harness those connections. Can we go towards designing and evaluating scalable socio-technical deliberation infrastructure using frameworks, not just this one, this was just an example. Many frameworks exist. Example, could we use them to help organize our thinking and our planning in that sense? Students would learn, realistic learning have real impacts. Society would have a massive increase in problem solving capacity. And students and universities would tick the boxes of community engagement. That's my argument.
Thank you very much, Aldo. Thank you. Do we have some quick question from the panel? Anyone want to ask? Oh, yes, we've got Simon. Simon?
So I'm just scratching my head thinking, why are we not seeing more industry, business engaged projects of the sort you're talking about? Right, because millions of programs all over the world provide industry engagement, etc., for students, and not just industry, but community and civic and so forth. Is the answer simply that we don't have enough CI awareness and literacy yet, and the platforms are not yet good enough to really support CI? Is it just that, or do you think there's something distinctively, structurally, systemically distinctive about CI, which makes it much harder to provide that kind of engaged experience?
That's an excellent question. I think a bit of both, but I'll focus on your last part, the distinctive part of CI. I think it's very hard because exactly when, so for example, these thorny, wicked problems, from climate change to all the other ones, typically they're so massive, they involve so many stakeholders, they involve so many nested and intersecting deliberations that need to take place basically all at the same time and influencing each other. So that giant mess is way too complex. So what happens in reality with all the time constraints, with all the energy constraints, is that people just pick the simple / artificial problems and you always start all over again. So can we find ways to that very limited time and energy that both students, their professors, and industry outside and other societal stakeholders have, can we focus it more? And I think that's up to us as CI designers and theorists and thinkers. Can we find that meshing infrastructure, not just in terms of technology, but also in terms of organizing things, of pooling these resources, of making sure that the next generation of students builds on interesting projects, that you have the meta knowledge of where the gaps in the projects, in the issues that are out there. And that's why I think the frameworks that we built on last year, and which, for example, Lucas has done a lot of work on, including, and the rest of the team of ANA's. So those kinds of processes, we need to really, it's an architectural issue. And what we often see, we just start building and we see where we end up, and in the end, people move on and it all collapses. So I think we need to get that meta awareness, what that larger picture is. And within that, you can then start playing with these socio-technical pieces.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aldo. I think we don't have time for another question. but we are moving to our next.
We have 5 minutes.
We have? They are past.
4.
Sorry? Simon?
I thought it was until 10 past 11, the slot.
John,
Sorry, we have 10 minutes for question instead of 5. My bad. Are there any other questions? Sorry, I thought we had 5 minutes. First time in my life I'm being a very precise facilitator. Is there any other question from the panel for Aldo?
sorry, I thought I saw Mark Armstrong had his hand up.
Yeah, it was more a
Who was-
comment on the question of is it a question of tooling or is it a question of the social? We don't have a practice of integrating collective intelligence into collective governance. And yes, there's a tooling aspect where we would like to make the contributions more visible and people should know, hey, there has been this contribution. Why is it being ignored? And at the level of politics. But I think making the tooling better to make decision structure more visible will get people used to, we could know why decisions are being taken and beginning to ask for that. And I think, yes, we have to make the tooling very explicit to allow visibility of decision structures in a way that people can consult and contribute to. And that way, I think what you're doing, Aldo, is important, but and I totally salute the work, but the tooling about large scale decision contribution system is also important.
Absolutely. And just a final point, because I think that otherwise we'll be really running out of my time, is that that's also what I mean by socio-technical intervention. I didn't really define it here, but it goes beyond the tool, and I think it's tools in context. So we have to much better understand the context, the social context of these tools. And that's part of, for me, of that patterning of these socio-technical interventions. So it's really, for example, what would that regreening debate synopsis tooling mean in a complex city political environment with lots of stakeholder interest at each other's throats? If you do agenda setting, there's a lot of politics that comes with it. So how would you, that seems innocent, but a synopsis, of course, there's power involved. Who is going to make the decisions on what the synopsis looks like? What voices are heard? What voices are not heard? So there's that whole community aspect involved as well, and civic intelligence and power. And so that's what I mean by these interventions, tooling in context. And we need to unpack these boxes and these black boxes.
I just had a brief comment as well, just to sort of agree with Aldo and Mark Antoine's points there. I think, what is critical here is that we actually build the tools and test them, build and iterate and practice using them. And they're always limited in certain respects. But we learn through those limitations and through those trials and evaluations what's working and what's not working. I mean, we had one EU project called the Route to PA project, which was the design of an open data platform for public administrators and citizens to collaborate together using open data to address contextual problems at the city level. And it was very, very difficult to build the tool, and it was very difficult to coordinate the participants to use it well and to engage them and to get that spirit of engagement and all of those things. But of course, we learned a lot through the process. And it is really important that we continue to build the tools and learn from our experience, including our failures. Because I think collectively, the more of that we're doing, if we have this meta-awareness, as you say, to say that we need to be moving in this direction, getting more practice in this direction, embedding this a little bit more into the curriculum, we'll get a critical mass of people converged on the challenge. Right now, we don't quite have that critical mass. I think this event is great because it's creating a certain critical mass and energy behind our initiatives, because we're all working in parallel on pieces of the puzzle here. So just to concur with everything that you said, yeah.
Great. Yeah, no, totally agree. So plenty more to talk, but not in my slot, I'm afraid.